Hello everyone, welcome to LTEC 620 Visual Design Session 6. In this video, we're going to consider the concept of design trade-offs. After that, we're going to review the 4 dimensions of learning and their relation to visual design and visual literacy. And we'll end this video by setting up a basic design portfolio in Wix.com. So let's get started. If we come back to our Venn diagram for the course, you can see here I've added a new component, the idea of design trade-offs in learning. So what do we mean by design trade-offs? Well, Alan Collins, the famous professor from Northwestern University, has argued that anytime we're creating learning environments for learning, there are a multitude of design decisions that need to be made. Now for this course, I want to cross out the word learning environments and focus on visual representations. But the premise stays the same. Anytime we're creating visual representations for learning, there are a multitude of design decisions that need to be made. Now, Collins argues that many of those design decisions are made unconsciously, without considering the consequences or the trade-offs of those individual design decisions. And he argues that a better approach would be to consciously consider each design decision and how it's eventually going to impact learners. And Collins' proposed approach is to think of each design decision in terms of its costs and benefits. In other words, every time you make a design decision, you need to ask yourself as the designer, what are the issues that must be addressed in designing visual representations? The second question you should ask yourself is, what are the cost-benefit trade-offs associated with each design issue? And thirdly, how should the costs and benefits be weighed? In his 1996 article, Collins shares a sampling of design trade-offs that he thinks are important for designers to consider when they're designing learning environments, or in this case, visual representations. So what are some of those design trade-offs? Well, here's a sampling of some of them that he talks about. There's a trade-off between memorization versus thoughtfulness. There's a trade-off between whole task skills versus component skills. There's a trade-off between breadth versus depth of knowledge, incidental versus direct learning, fun versus serious learning, learner control versus computer control. And then, interestingly, there's a trade-off between cognitive fidelity and physical fidelity. It's this last design trade-off, cognitive fidelity versus physical fidelity, that I want to focus on right now. So what is cognitive fidelity versus physical fidelity? Well, the idea is very applicable to visual design. And Collins asked the question, what is the trade-off between preserving physical fidelity to the environment versus preserving only cognitive fidelity? Now, he argues that there are costs associated with stressing cognitive fidelity. And those costs include learners, if they learn from a representation that is cognitively oriented, learners may not recognize particular situations in the real world because they look different. Another cost is that important mappings for understanding a system may be lost. And a third cost is that representations that do not include a large portion of the mapping in reality risk hiding critical elements on which people rely in the real world. On the flip side, there are benefits of stressing cognitive fidelity. For example, it might make it possible to focus on the salient aspects of the situation or the system. In other words, the designer can draw attention to those super important concepts within the system or situation. Another benefit is that learners might not get lost in the complexity of a representation that preserves physical fidelity. And thirdly, cognitive representations are often cheaper to create. So let's look at a concrete example of this. So here on the left, we have a pretty simplistic look at a steam engine. And in fact, we could go one step further and really mask the train itself and just focus on the component parts of the system. So this is really a cognitive representation, and it doesn't preserve a lot of the physical fidelity to a real world train. Now, in contrast, take a look at the picture on the right. Here's that same system with much more physical fidelity. It's much more to scale. You can see that it's actually much more of a complex system. There are a lot of different parts in here. And of course, the idea is that there's a trade-off between which representation we use. And we've already talked about the costs and benefits of these different representations. Here's another example from the real world. Here is a portion of the famous New York City subway map. And this is a very interesting case study in the balance between usability and geographic accuracy. In fact, the subway map actually has a disclaimer in fine print that says, "To show service more clearly, geography on this map has been modified." Essentially, they're acknowledging that some of the real-world physical fidelity has been modified in order to show the subway service more clearly to end users. There's an interesting counterexample that was put together by the designer Eddie Jabbour. He's used a concept called helpful distortion, and he's argued that his New York City subway map is actually much more useful and usable by end users, and he used helpful distortion in order to make it more usable. He distorted certain elements of the design in order to make the map more useful. Now, there's an interesting anecdote. When he actually shared this with officials of the subway system, they rejected his design because they argued his design distorted geographic accuracy too much, and they preferred their own subway map, which had this careful balance. And finally, I just wanted to show you this fun design of the New York City subway map that distorts the geography completely for a more artistic look of what is the New York City subway system. Now, I wanted to share these examples with you and emphasize this tension, this design trade-off between cognitive and physical fidelity, because as visual designers or people making decisions about the use of visual representations for teaching and learning, this is one of the design trade-offs you should be keeping in mind. Now, finally, I just wanted to show this example from a textbook, which I think is interesting. It actually has several visual representations put together in kind of one chart. On the top, we see more of a cognitive representation of the electromagnetic spectrum. And we can see this kind of exaggerated abstraction of the different wavelengths. And then down below that, there is the tie-in to physical reality. So we have pictures from the real world, such as radio waves, microwaves, ultraviolet rays, and X-rays. And so this is an interesting design decision to try to combine both a cognitive representation and a physically accurate real-world depiction of those same concepts. All right, so let's move on. Now I want to talk a little bit more about making design decisions consciously by reflecting on Critical Reflection 5. And of course, you all remember this particular assignment. We showed you this quote-unquote game called Arrow Cards, and we asked you to evaluate the overall effectiveness of this piece of interactive media. In particular, we asked you to focus on surface-level problems and some of the underlying conceptual-level problems with this design. And as a class, we came up with lots of problems. So on the left here, we see a list of surface-level problems, such as no explicit instructions. There's no text label on the red Add button. There's no clear entry or starting point. There's no feedback or addition sign. The New button is in an unconventional position. There's a lack of balance and proportion. Some of you argued there's too many graphics. It's kind of a crowded, overwhelming interface. There's not enough use of quote-unquote white space. And the New button is in an arbitrary, strange shape. On the flip side, many of you argued that there are severe conceptual problems. Some of those problems included no clear goal or sub-goals. The 1, 10, and 100 boxes, although they represent different quantities, are all the same size. There's a confusing numerical layout. In fact, number 1, the smallest unit, is up and to the left, and the bigger numbers are down at the bottom. It's not clear what aspect of the task is central. Is it the selection of the numbers? Is it addition? Is it place value? And then some of you argued that the task is actually too abstract. There's no real world grounding. What are we adding? Are we adding beans or counting blocks, for example? What is it that we're just clicking numbers, and why are we doing that? We need some sort of real world authentic tie-in, perhaps, to make this activity more meaningful. Stepping back even further, we might argue that the root cause of why this design isn't particularly effective is the idea that it lacks conceptual clarity. If we ask ourselves, what is this activity really about, we might argue that it's really about place value. And place value, of course, is related to a number of different things, including addition, equality, numerical magnitude, the decimal system, and of course, the Western numeric symbol system. Why that's important is if we look here, just based on our understanding of elementary mathematics instruction, we know that we use different representations depending on what we're covering. And all of these concepts, of course, are related. The arrow cards, quote unquote, game really struggled because it was designed without the designer considering all of the design trade-offs he or she was making in putting this together. So it really struggles from an efficacy and a usability point of view. So now what I want to do is show you some examples of other designs that people have made to try to improve this particular design. So here's an example of trying to stay true to the initial design, but several changes have been made. Notice the color coding stays the same, green, blue, and yellow. But what happens is when a learner selects each of the numbers, they get slotted into an addition equation that ultimately ends up being totaled or summed into a very clear number. Here's another example that highlights ones, tens, and hundreds. And notice it has the interactive equals button. After selecting a ones, tens, and hundreds, the user actually has to click the equals button to arrive at the sum of 247. But also notice the emphasis here on the decimal system and the ones, tens, and hundreds place value. And here's another example. Here's an interesting example where users have to click on the groups. And what's interesting about this is it's really emphasizing the magnitude or the differences between each of the number of dots in each of the groups. So you can have a group of 1, a group of 10, or a group of 100. And pressing one of those groups increments the counter by that particular number of dots or that number of units. Now, I wanted to review all of this with you because this exercise is an excellent example of the design trade-offs that Alan Collins was encouraging educators and designers to think about when designing learning materials. And as designers, I really want to emphasize the importance of making these decisions consciously and thinking about their consequences on teaching and learning. Okay, so let's move forward. So in our next section, I want to focus on building a portfolio using Wix. So as you know, Design Project 6 has already been released, and the content of your portfolio can be divided up into 3 sections. Number 1, you're going to have your initial submissions as well as your redesign submissions for 5 design projects, projects 1 through 5. In addition to those submissions, you have to have explanatory information about each design project. What is it? And what's the rationale behind your design? And then finally, you have to have an About Me page that's simply a reflection on how visual design fits in with your identity as an educational or professional. Now, some of you may be asking, how much redesign is necessary? What I want to point out is you don't have to redesign everything from the ground up. What we want you to do is take the feedback that you've been given, and what we're looking for are substantive refinements and improvements. Substantive refinements and improvements. In other words, we're looking for your progress from the initial submission that you handed in for the assignment, and we want you to refine and improvement substantively. So briefly, what we're going to cover in this tutorial is how to set up a portfolio in Wix. We see an example here. This is my landing page, Dan Hoffman Educator. You can see along the horizontal menu that I have a home page, which we're looking at here. There's an about page where I've put the about me information, and then I have one dedicated page for each of my 5 design projects. So in order to make sense of this tutorial, I'm going to assume you've already done some things. So what do I assume you've done? Well, first, I assume that you've already gone to Wix.com, you've clicked the Getting Started button, and you've signed up with an account, and you can see how to do that here. You have to enter your email, create a password. Once you set up your account, it asks you this decision here. It asks you to choose how you want to create your website. And what we want to do is create our websites with the Wix editor, the choice on the right. So from here, we're going to choose a template, and this is where my tutorial will begin. So let's transition to the tutorial. Okay, so let's get started with building the shell of our online portfolio. So before I start using Wix, I have spent a little bit of time organizing some of the content that I'm going to use for my design portfolio. So you can see over here that I have a folder called Website Assets, and if I go into that folder, I have a number of things already prepared. So I have my design project 1, the final design. If I come down to the next file, I have the initial design, and I have project 2, final design, and initial design, so on and so forth. So I have a final design and initial design for each project. And then in addition, I actually have some text already prepared. So I have an about description, and this is just placeholder text that I'm going to use to set up the shell of my online portfolio. And then I have a couple of paragraphs of placeholder text that I'm going to use for the project descriptions. So I have all of this information prepared, which is going to help me build the shell of my online portfolio. So now I'm going to jump over to the browser, and I've begun setting up my Wix account, and it's asking me if I want to answer a few questions. I'm going to skip that, so I'm just going to come down here to the lower right and click skip. And here is where you get to this decision. How do you want to create your website? And I want to choose a template. So I'm going to create the website with the Wix editor. So I'm going to choose a template, and then essentially what happens is we get this really nice preview panel of all of these different templates that we can use. Now, you can use any template that you want. There's lots of excellent examples here. So go ahead and feel free to browse around and find something that works for you. Now, I've already done a little bit of homework, but I'm going to come over to the design area, and I'm going to scroll through and see what catches my eye, if anything. I'm going to kind of leaf through these, and I'm going to choose this one right here, which is actually an architect portfolio. And it's nice, simple, and clean, and I think it's something that I can work with pretty easily. So I'm going to choose Edit, and it's going to take a second for Wix to work, but essentially what it's going to do is ask me, it's going to say, welcome to Wix. We can watch this video if we want. I'm going to skip this for the tutorial. And here I am. I'm in the editor. So let's take a moment to get oriented. So importantly, we have anytime we want to add content to our website, we're going to use these buttons over here on the left-hand side. Up at the top, we have a lot of important information. This particular website template comes with a home page, an about page, a CV page, and a book online page. And you can only, when you're building a website, you can only edit one page at a time. So how do I know what page I'm looking at tells me up here. The current page that I'm looking at is page home. If I wanted to look at a different page, I could drop this menu down and click on About, or I could switch over to the CV page, or I could click on the project page. And I actually like the design of this project page. It's got a title up here with a picture, and then it looks like it has some placeholder text and then some more pictures down here. And then it looks like there's a button back to portfolio. Now, a couple of other things that I want to notice, that I want to point out while we're going through this is there's a save button. So as I make changes to my website, I want to click save. Now, I really haven't done anything but change which page I'm looking at, but I want to click save just to be safe. Now, the first time I do that, Wix.com is going to ask me, what domain do I want to use? In other words, what URL, what address is my site going to be hosted at? And I can't adjust the front part of it, but I do have control over the last part of it. And so I want to do something meaningful, such as Dan, and I can only use hyphens. I can't use underscores. So I'm going to say Dan Hoffman LTEC-620, like that. Dan Hoffman, Dan-Hoffman LTEC-620, and then I'm going to save and continue. And now it's telling me, hey, your site was saved. And if I actually want to see that, I have to publish. And when I publish now, it's going to give me the URL to my site. And so this is something you're going to want to bookmark so that you can see what your published website looks like. And so I'm going to copy that link, and then I'm going to open it in a new tab. And it's showing me this is actually my live published website that I'm going to work on. And so I'm going to spend the majority of my time, I'm going to close this left tab, I'm going to toggle between the Wix editor, which allows me to change my website, and my actually live published website. Now, anytime I make a change over here using the Wix website editor, anytime I make a change, I'm going to have to click Save and then click Publish. When I do that, all of those changes will take place over here, and they will be live for me to see. Now, of course, many of you are noticing this banner ad up at the top. Because we're using the free version of Wix.com, this advertisement for Wix.com is always going to be here. So there's nothing we can do about that. We're not expecting you to pay for the upgraded versions, which get rid of that ad, but that's okay. For our purposes, we can leave that banner ad right where it is. Okay, so let's come back over to the Wix website editor. Now, a couple of things that I want to do first and foremost is I want to make sure I have some of the tools turned on. So when I hover over the tools menu, one of the things I notice is the rulers is unchecked. So I'm going to turn that on because I like being able to have rulers to understand how wide my page is. It's 1,000 pixels, okay, and it can be really as long as I want. And another thing I want to show you here is this kind of tools panel that's hovering over here. You can move this around and you can actually close it. When you close it and you want it to come back up, you'll notice if I come back over to tools, that toolbar is not selected anymore. If I want it to come back, I just toggle that on and boom, I've got my toolbar right there. So I know a couple of things. Now, first I want to just get my page layout pretty simple. So if I look through my book online page, which came with the template. This is something that I actually don't want. I'm not going to have any bookings for my design portfolio, so I'm actually going to delete that page. So I'm going to come over here to Manage Pages, and notice it's giving me a list here of the different pages. I have a home page, an about page, a CV page, a project page. And notice that the visibility of the project page is turned off. So what I want to do is click on this dotted menu, and I want to make sure Show is available. And when I do that, if I close this, project page is now visible up here in my horizontal navigation menu. Now I want to come back over to Manage Pages, and I decided I don't want the Book Online page, so I'm actually going to click on the three dots and I'm going to delete that page. And it's going to say, are you sure? And I'm going to say yes. And I'm not going to have a CV page either. If we look at this, this isn't really something that I want. I actually have a design CV that I'm going to feature as a design project, so I don't need this particular page. So I'm going to come back over and I'm going to say delete this CV page. And now what I want to do is work on my home page. Now, first and foremost, so right now I have home, about, and a project page. But first and foremost, my name is not Michelle Mayer. So I'm going to double click on this text, and I'm actually going to put in my own name, Dan Hoffman. And I'm going to delete this text here. And of course, I'm not an architect, so I don't want to have that be my tagline or my descriptor. So I'm going to put in educator. Whoops, misspelled it there. You can put in whatever descriptor you want. And I'm going to go, notice there are lots of settings here. I can change the color of the font, but I'll get to all of that a little bit later on. So I'm going to X out of this. And now I want to show you, if I come to my published site, it still says Michelle Mayer. But what I want to do, in order for my changes to take effect, I have to click Save. And it's saying, okay, and I want to publish now. I can do that by clicking here. And it's going to publish. And it's going to say, congratulations, you've already done that. Now, if I come over here and if I refresh the live page, I'm going to see those changes taking place. You can see now I only have 3 pages, a home page, an about page, and a project page. And it now says Dan Hoffman, Educator. So let me work a little bit more, come back over to the Wix editor. And I don't want this particular image. So what I'm going to do is click Change Image. And there's lots of things here, but what I want to do is actually, I'm going to browse some of the free graphics from Wix. And there's any type of picture that I could choose here. These are all free that any of you could use for your landing page. If you want to design your own image, you could do that. I'm actually going to come over to illustrations, and I want to have kind of a worldly or global feel to my website. So I'm actually going to type in and search on Earth. And beautifully, there's lots of nice examples here. I like this globe kind of pencil drawing that comes up. So I'm going to choose that image. And Wix is going to replace that existing image with the one that I've just selected. And I can change the size of this, so I can crop it. And right now it's zoomed way in at 400%. I don't really want that, so I'm going to go down to just 100%. And let's see what that looks like. Whoops. Let me see if I can reset the crop. Oh, so I'm going to do that by selecting Reset the Crop. And that resizes it. Good. And now what I want to do is actually slide this over so that Wix is actually helping me line things up. I'm looking for that center mark right there. Boom. So now I have my globe. It says Dan Hoffman, Educator. And that's pretty nice. I like that. So I'm going to click Save. And you can dismiss this message if you don't want it to show up every time. So I'm actually going to click that and just say done. I don't want to see that message every time. And now I want to switch pages. I'm going to work more on the landing page in a few minutes, but essentially I'm going to come over to the About page. And I don't want my contact information to be shown, so I'm going to do some serious editing to this. So first thing I'm going to do is select this text box and delete it. And I'm just going to select some of this text. I don't want this input box or this social media stuff. I just want About Me, and I want to have some text. I'm going to resize this text box so it's something like this, centered in here. Now remember, I already had some of my text prepared, so I'm going to come back over to my About Me description text. I'm going to load that up. And I just have placeholder text that I'm going to use for now. And you can see my computer has created this text. I'm going to, or opened this text file. I'm going to select all and copy. And then I'm going to come back over to Wix and I'm going to double click in this box. I'm going to delete everything that's here and I'm going to paste in my description, just like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I'm going to select it. I want to make sure I could center it, I could left align it, but I want my text to be justified. So I'm going to select that there and see how that looks. Okay, very good. If I scroll down, I have multiple paragraphs here. Ooh, and one of the things that I noticed is that the footer of my website, again, has the template name, not my name. And so I definitely need to edit that. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to double click. And I want it to be copyrighted for this year, 2018. And I'm going to put in my name, Dan Hoffman. And I don't want the name. I don't need to put educator in there. I'm just going to say Dan Hoffman. And proudly created with Wix.com. I could edit that. I'd say proudly designed for LTEC 620. I like that better. And I'm going to click period. And one thing that I want to show you is that I could change the font. I can do whatever I want. I'll get to some of those details later. But for right now, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And I'm going to close the text settings. And I've made several changes now. So I want to click save and publish. And again, I don't want this website to click up, or to pop up. So I'm going to click done. Now if I come over to my published website and I refresh it, I see Dan Hoffman Educator. If I click on the About page, boom, About Me. I've got my 5 paragraphs, and down at the bottom, the footer says, Copyright 2018 by Dan Hoffman, proudly designed for LTEC 620. Okay, we're making progress. Very good. So now what I want to do is work on the project page. So let's come back over to the editor and let's change which page we're working on. I'm going to work on the project page. Now I don't want this to be called project page. I actually want this to be called project page, or I actually want this to be called design project 1. So I'm going to come over to my manage page menu and I am going to select rename. And I want to rename this Design Project 1. Whoops, it looks like little typo, and I'm going to click Done. Okay, good. And you can see my menu item automatically updated. Now I want the title of this to reflect that name change as well. It doesn't have to match, but that's a design choice I'm making. So I want this to be called Design Project 1. Now I want to make sure this is centered right in the middle of the page. So I'm going to actually resize this text box so it goes from one margin to the next. And I want to make sure there's no extra space at the end. So it's just one period. Good. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is replace this image. So I'm going to choose this. Or I'm going to select this image that came with the template, and I'm going to say I want to change image. Now, by default, this Wix takes us to the My Images, and where it has all media. And right now I don't have any images in my site. So what I want to do is upload all of the design project images that I've exported from Gravit Designer. So I'm going to come up here and click on Upload Images. And when I do that, that's going to take me to my desktop. Well, it's already taking me to website assets, but I'm going to go desktop, website assets, and I am going to select all of my final. I'm going to select all of the images in my assets folder. I'm going to click open, and Wix is going to one by one upload all 10 of those files that I've prepared. And it does this surprisingly fast. Uploaded 6 of 10, 9 of 10, and then 10 of 10. Excellent. So I'm going to click done now. And now I can choose the image that I want to replace. So I know I'm working on Design Project 1, so I'm going to choose the final Design Project 1 final design, choose that image, and it's going to replace the image that came with the template. Now I want to do a couple of things. I want to add an animation to this, so I'm going to click that. I'm going to select Fade In. I want that image to fade in when the page loads. So I'm going to close that. And then another tweak that I'm going to make is what happens when a user clicks on it. So I'm going to choose the gear icon for settings, and I'm going to come over to this menu, and it says when the image is clicked, right now it defaults to a link opens. I don't want to open a link. What I want to do is open the image in a pop-up. And so I'm just going to select that, and then I'm going to close this. Good. And now what I want to do is replace this text, because I'm going to have a little bit of text to describe Design Project 1. So I'm going to come back over to my assets, and I've got a little project description text here, which is just 2 paragraphs that I wrote. I'm going to copy that text, come back over, and I'm going to replace the template text with my description. And I want it to look pretty good, so I'm going to put in a space between, and I'm going to highlight all of this text, and I'm going to justify it for my alignment. Good. Excellent. So I've got my Design Project 1 final design. I've got my 2 paragraphs talking about the final design. And then finally what I want to do is have the initial design down here at the bottom. So I'm going to select the image that came with the template. I'm going to select Change Images. And it looks like Wix, the template came with several images, and I'm going to delete these, because that's not what I want. I just want a single image. And it's going to be not the final design, but Design Project 1, the initial design. And I'm going to say Add to Gallery. Excellent. And I want... Actually, I don't want to... I'm going to delete this whole component. And what I want to do is add some content. So I'm going to say add. What do I want to add? I want to add an image. What kind of image from the images that I've uploaded? And I'm going to choose initial design and add to page. There we go. Good. And I'm going to leave this button here for now. So essentially my page goes Design Project 1 final design. I've got my description text, and then the initial design down here at the bottom. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to publish it. And now what I'm going to do is come over to my live website and just preview. What does that look like? Good. I happen to be on Design Project 1. We saw it fade in. We've got 2 paragraphs of text, and then we've got the initial project down here at the bottom. And if I click on Final Project 1, I can see how it looks here. And that's that pop-up feature that we added. Now that I've got Project 1 designed, this page design for project 1, I can copy this page. And so I'm going to come over here to Manage Pages. And what I'm going to do is, with Design Project 1 selected, I'm going to say Duplicate Page. And I'm going to rename this to Design Project 2, of course. And click Done. I'm going to duplicate that page and rename it to Design Project 3. And I'm going to select this and duplicate it, and I'm going to rename that to Design Project 4. And I'm going to do one more for Design Project 5. And click Done. Excellent. Now notice when I close that, if I look here at my horizontal menu, I have a page dedicated to each of my design projects. So now what I need to do is edit each of those project pages. So I'm going to drop down. Let's go to project 2 first. And I already have the template set up, so all I need to do now is replace each image. So I'm going to select this image and say, tell Wix to change the image. And let's see, I think Design Project 2 was green. And so I'm going to select this green one here and choose image. Yep, Project 2 final design, very good. And I'm going to come down to the initial design and again, change image. And I'm going to do that for Project 2. Very good. And of course, I would need to update this placeholder text, but I can do that later. Okay, so I've gone ahead and updated all of my pages. If I actually publish my site or use the preview button, I can see here I've got Design Project 1 and each image fades in. I can go to Design Project 2 and I see that design, Design Project 3, Design Project 4, and Design Project 5. And notice I renamed each of the titles of each of these pages. Now what I want to show you how to do is to actually create a little bit more color. You can see on the home page of the template there's actually this gallery. So I want to show you a little bit about that. So I'm going to return back to the editor and I'm going to make sure that I'm editing the home page and I'm going to scroll down. I don't really want this introductory text in here, so I'm going to just select it and delete it, and I don't need this second horizontal line, but I do want this gallery, so I'm going to try to drag this up just a bit so it comes right up to that line like this. And of course I want to have my own artwork in this gallery, so I'm going to click on Manage Media, and you can see here that the template came with a whole bunch of pictures that aren't mine. So what I'm going to do is say select all, and I'm going to delete them. I don't want those, but what I want to do is add my own images. So I'm going to say add media, and I'm going to click image, and I'm just going to select 4 of the larger designs, and I'm going to say add to page, something like that. And now I don't really quite like how this looks, where we've got the green one down here. And so I am going to come on to settings, and we have lots of things we can do with this. So with the gallery, we can click on layout, and I actually want a column layout like this. And I can, but there's all kinds of things. You can do something like this, where it's kind of a slideshow and it just moves through. You can do a 4x4 grid, masonry layout, a collage layout. This really depends on how many images you're including, but I like the column layout, and I'm going to actually add some spacing between these. Not too much, but let's try 40 pixels. I'm going to try to center this on the page, so something like that. And then what I want to do is resize this a little bit so it comes right up to the edge. And then what I'm going to do is position this whole thing. What I want to do is position this whole thing so it lines right up on the center of the page like that. And that's really going to be my gallery. So if I save that and I publish it. And actually I can just go to the preview button here to see what it looks like. I can see I've got my designs here, and if I click on them, they're going to load up so my visitors can see the full thing. And let's try out my about page. Good. My design project 1 should be in here. Excellent. And if I click back to portfolio, it takes me back to the home page automatically because that's how it was programmed. And there you have it, folks. This is just the shell, the basic outline of building a design portfolio using Wix.com. Now that I have these basic components in place, I can really come in here. I can play with color, typography, and layout, and I can add in all kinds of bells and whistles to really make and customize this portfolio so that it's something I'm proud of and doesn't look too much like the Wix provided template that I began with. And that's the end to the Session 6 video. Thanks and have a great week. We can't wait to see what you guys come up with.